Namaste, everyone. Thank you all for joining our 7th webinar, part of Northeast Hindu Yuva's Hinduism in the 21st Century webinar series. My name is Jannavi Ganesh, and I'm the co-coordinator for the series and a rising sophomore at Rutgers University. I'm also the treasurer of Rutgers Hindu Yuva. Hindu Yuva is a student-run, nonprofit, socio-cultural organization with a presence in over 35 universities and cities in the United States. Our aim is to practice, promote, and preserve our Hindu identity while growing up in the United States. Before I begin introducing our topic and moderator for today, I want to thank you all for watching last week's webinar about the Hindu social thought, which had more than 4,000 views within the last 7 days. Throughout today's event, viewers watching live on YouTube and Facebook are welcome to comment any questions they have about the topic, and we will be choosing unique questions for our moderator to ask our speaker. So, without further ado, our topic for tonight is Epics Through the Ages, a modern rendition of Hindu storytelling, being moderated by Soham Pant. Soham is currently a rising senior at Penn State University, majoring in nuclear engineering. He is also the coordinator for Hindu Yuva chapter at Penn State University and is planning on starting a chapter there. He is also part of the cycling team at Penn State. His interests include philosophy and reading. So thank you, Soham, for being our moderator for today.
Thank you, Janviji, for that amazing introduction. And I'd like to get started by introducing our speaker for today. So our speaker is none other than the amazing Amish Tripathi ji. So Amish Tripathi is an author, columnist, and diplomat. He is a graduate from IIM Calcutta and has worked for 14 years in the financial services industry before turning a new page and starting full-time writing. He is described by the BBC as India's Tolkien because he combines a unique take on crackling storytelling, religious symbolism, and profound philosophies that has turned him into an Indian publishing phenomenon. His books have been translated into 19 Indian and international languages. His Shiva Trilogy and Ram Chandra Series are the fastest and second fastest selling book series in the Indian publishing history, respectively. In 2019, he was appointed a diplomatic role as director of the Nehru Center in London, India's premier cultural center abroad. Amishji, thank you for joining us on this webinar. Okay, Amishji, I think we'll get started right away. So first, we're gonna have a little bit kind of a just an icebreaker type question, and then we'll kind of jump into the more nitty-gritties. So the first question I have for you is, growing up, I distinctly remember kind of my mother telling me stories of our Indian classics, of our Hindu classics, stories like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. What was your kind of first experience or first exposure to these stories? Do you have like a memory that you remember vividly? Amish, you're on mute, by the way.
My apologies. I'm 45 years old. I'm allowed my technical snafus. So, I guess, because of my family background, I will, from as long as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, we've grown up with this, with our stories. My grandfather was a Pandit in Kashi at the Vishwanathji temple there. And he was also a teacher at the Banaras Hindu University. Both my parents are very religious. My grandmother on my mother's side is was also a teacher and deeply religious. So we grew up in that atmosphere where our dinner conversation was essentially around our texts, around our philosophies, around our scriptures. So one can't. I mean, our tradition can't be encapsulated into one book. We're not a way of life of one book. We're a way of life of an entire library. And the library is so vast that it's impossible for one normal individual to read all of those texts together. It is impossible. But normally how most of us begin our journey, and I'm talking about all Dharmic faiths, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, how many of us begin our journey into our traditions is usually with the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. It's the first standard normally. And then you go deeper and deeper. The Vedas are, of course, at the graduation level. The Upanishads are at the post-graduation level. So it began with stories of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Not the entire text, of course, because we were too young, but some parts of the story, and then, a lesson from that story. That's how it began. And just good fortune of birth. I just learned most of my stuff through family.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up, right? That it's not really just one or two stories that kind of can encapsulate our culture. It's kind of a vast library. And I think that draws kind of really nicely into our next question, is with any culture or religion, right? There is a very distinct kind of role that storytelling plays. So kind of how do you think that sort of storytelling plays into Hinduism, just as an example, right? Maybe can you give like one or two very distinct examples that you can think of that storytelling plays a very key and crucial role into the Hindu Dharma?
I think the best way to discuss this would be through the example of Ved Vyas. Okay, so I'm sure you're aware he composed the Mahabharata, right? He didn't write it. Lord Ganesh ji wrote it, but Ved Vyas ji composed it, right? But his original name was not Ved Vyas. Ved Vyas is actually a title. His original name was Krishna Dwaipayam. And there's a Ved Vyas of every age. Every age has its own Ved Vyas. So how did the Ved Vyas of our age become Ved Vyas? Because what he had done, so the tradition tells us, is that he had compiled the Vedas. Right? So anyone who compiles and divides the Vedas so that we normal human beings can understand it, because it is believed that at the end of every age, the Vedas get lost. And someone then has to compile it once again for a new age. And hence, Krishna Dwaipayan ji compiled the Vedas for our age. So hence he became the Ved Vyas, the compiler of the Vedas. So he got the title for that. He got that title for our age. But he also composed the Mahabharata. And I'm sure you're aware, it is believed that he composed the Mahapuranas as well. There are 18 Mahapuranas. Many Upapuranas, but there are 18 Mahapuranas. So the legend goes that Ved Vyas ji knew that the Vedas are very critical, that they are very important, as are the Upanishads. But for most ordinary people, it is very difficult to understand the Vedas or the Upanishads. Right? The Ishavasya Upanishad, one of the shortest Upanishads. And if you want to, you can technically finish reading it in an hour. But you might not understand most of it. It might take you an entire lifetime to understand the Ishavasya Upanishad because they are so complex. Right? All our Upanishads. So the legend goes is that Ved Vyasis realized that the Vedas are important, they are critical to learn, but most people will not understand it. Hence, he should compose a story. Right? The idea, like the Mahabharata, and based on actual events, but the idea being that through that story, people will understand the philosophies that are there in the Vedas, which is why in our tradition that times the Mahabharata is called the fifth Veda. Right? So the concept was that the Vedas are critical, they are pure philosophy. There are a few stories in there, but largely they are philosophical texts. Difficult to understand. People understand stories much more easily. So therefore he composed the Mahabharata so that you can understand the philosophies of the Vedas while enjoying a brilliant story. Right? Mahabharata you can't put down, right? Because it's a page turner, right? As you know, one of our filmmaking guys would say, full masala entertainer. There's everything in there. But at the same time, without realizing it, while enjoying a wonderful story, you will understand the philosophies of the Vedas. So that's a power of storytelling. It just makes things much easier to understand. That's where our tradition comes from. It's the importance of storytelling.
Yeah, I think I think there's also, I think, a very key point that you brought up there, right? Is that there's a lot of things that are based in history, but then there's a lot of masala also that to keep people interested in kind of the story. So that, I think modern scholars, right? I'll say scholars because some people will argue that they have not properly read our texts, but a lot of students will listen to these scholars and they'll argue that our Puranas and our epics are nothing but stories, right? There's no element of truth. There's no element of reality in these stories. But there's also kind of a sizable portion of us who believe that, yes, this is part of our itihas, right? This is our history. So how do you think we should go about kind of talking to people like this and kind of drawing that line saying that, hey, you should understand that this is the history, this is some masala that's there. How do we go about that?
Let me answer this at two levels. According to the Western tradition, who is considered to be the father of history? Because Western academics keep telling us history is history, it's the truth. And mythology is, it's not really the truth, You pagans, you can accept it if you want to, but we will tell you what the truth is. That's what the Western academics want to tell us, right? So, and history is truth. It's the one truth. And if you don't believe in the one truth, you're going to burn in hell and all that, right? I'm joking, obviously. But, so who's the father of history according to Western academics? Do you know?
No, I'm not aware.
So there's this chap called Herodotus. Okay. It obviously cannot be an Indian guy because, how could Indians have, according to Western academics, has to be a Westerner. And the oldest Westerner who wrote some history text was Herodotus. Okay. Now, there are some things in Herodotus's text which, yes, you can learn from. But you should actually read those texts because they're really enjoyable, because Herodotus at times describes an elephant. Okay. Because Greeks hadn't seen elephants when they came to India. And Herodotus, according to him, the elephant's ears were actually wings to help the elephant fly. And this is the father of history. Right? So, I mean, look, there's enough masala in their text as well. Right? This thing that those who don't fall into the Western canon are somehow idiotic, and they will tell us, what can be believed, what can be not, is frankly silly. This thing that, as Macaulay had said, one shelf of a European library is worth more than the entire literature of India is stupid. It doesn't show the quality of India's text, it shows the quality of Macaulay's reading. Right? This thing that is told to us that Indians did not write, and we were an oral culture, and therefore we don't know what the truth is, whereas the Westerners wrote, is also utter nonsense. The number of Greek handwritten, the printing press was invented in the 14th century. Before that, texts were written by hand. So obviously the number of books would be far lower than post the printing press. The number of books shot up, obviously. The number of Greek handwritten manuscripts that survive till today is between 20 to 30,000, right? Which is a good number. And Greece is the mother culture of Europe, right? So it gives you an idea of the knowledge production of the ancient West. Guess how many Sanskrit texts survive till today, according to the National Mission of Manuscripts. And I've given you a Greek number to give you a sense of the numbers. And when you tell me when you guess the Sanskrit number of handwritten manuscripts, take into account that the Nalanda University was burned to the ground, Takshashila University was burned to the ground, Ujjain, Mahodaipuram, Udaygiri, Vikramshila, all our greatest universities. Tirupati, so many of them were destroyed, burned to the ground. God knows how many manuscripts were lost. In my mind, the destructions of these universities was the biggest disaster for mankind, not just for India, but for mankind. Right? What the Turkic invasions did. Now take all this into account and then guess how many Sanskrit manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, survive till today.
I think I'll garner, I guess, around 40, 50,000?
Go higher.
100,000.
Huh? 100,000. Go higher.
Million.
Go higher.
Oh,
3 million. 3 million.
Wow.
And this is only what has been tabulated by the National Mission of Manuscripts. There are many more which have probably not been tabulated. Because remember, many of our manuscripts, many people actually, because when the invasions, when the Turks attacked, they're the British, many manuscripts were hidden away in homes. Many were actually taken away to Tibet. God knows how many have not been discovered. 3 million. More than the rest of the ancient world combined. We did right. And they're not just religious texts. Many of them are scientific texts, medical texts, mathematical texts. Right? So there is enough knowledge to show that we had an idea of what the truth was. And there is enough in our in the Ramayana and Mahabharata to explore what could have been the true story, which gave rise to the, and some fanciful things were added to it. I'm not denying that. But you know, the earth actually wobbles, right? It doesn't just rotate, it wobbles.
Yes.
So there's and that's a concept called precession. So if the sky has been described in a text, you can enter that into a software, the nakshatra, and then guess when would the sky have actually been that way, because the earth wobbles. The sky has been described in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata at a few instances. When Lord Ram was born, for example, or when Lord Krishna died, for example, right?
Yeah.
When Lord Krishna gave up his mortal body and went back up. So you can use that to study the truth, but scholars haven't studied it. Having said all this, I think we should also try and clarify the Indian approach to truth as compared to the Western approach. Because the Western approach is, even the liberal secular approach in the West, comes as a continuum of their religious approach, that there is one truth. And if you don't accept their truth, then you are somehow, you're an idiot. As Indians, our ancestors understood a very simple fundamental concept. There is only one subject in which one truth is possible. Guess which subject that is? Mathematics.
Yeah.
In mathematics. In mathematics, one truth is possible. Because in mathematics, 2 plus 2 is 4. There is no perspective in it. Right?
Yeah.
In every other subject, right, there are multiple truths. There is your truth and there's my truth. And our perspective defines the truth that we see. Even in theoretical physics, they are accepting that there could be parallel universes, and what we see, what we experience as our universe is defined by our observer bias.
Yes.
So therefore, ancient Indians were like the mature adult which accepted there are multiple truths. Whereas many of these guys who think they know the truth are like the immature children saying, I know the truth, I know the truth. So they need to grow up and accept that there are multiple truths.
Yeah.
It's a long-winded answer, but if some of them are willing to engage, then we can engage with them and explain to them.
Awesome. That was a really good answer. Like, I feel like a lot of people would have that kind of question, and I think that answer kind of touches upon every possible kind of burden or like hurdle they would have before asking that question or even answering that question themselves. So we'll jump into our next kind of theme before we jump into our kind of viewer questions, because we're starting to get those in. So if you have questions in the audience and you have not asked them, please go ahead and ask. We are compiling them as we speak. So as mentioned before, right, we mentioned that the Vedas are almost purely philosophical in nature. And in a past interview of yours, I heard you say that there's no separating Hindu epics from philosophy. So I think there are some characters that I've personally thought about a lot as I've been reading more rather than from when I was a kid, right? For example, the character of Ram versus Raavan, right? When you're a kid, that's usually very polar. It's Ram is good, Raavan is bad. But do you think that there is anything humans or people should take away from Raavan, like any good qualities that we should take from Raavan, and kind of what are the bad things that we should avoid? And like just a quick answer, if you could.
I think a large part of how you absorb knowledge is driven by your attitude. And often language conveys the attitude of a culture far more deeply, like the way the language is structured, the way the words are. Like for example, in English, the one male god is written with a capital G, the female goddess is written with a small g. A subtle thing, but it shows you the culture in which the language emerged. It's a very patriarchal culture. Right? The male god is superior to the female goddess. In Vedic Sanskrit, even in classical Sanskrit, which is the language of our ancestors, there is no difference between the god and the goddess in the way you refer to them. It's the same term. There is no lack of respect for the goddess. In any prayer, you'll notice whether you're referring to a god or a goddess or you as an individual, it'll be the same term, Twam, right, in Sanskrit. It shows something about the culture in which that language emerged, right? The egalitarian nature of this culture. Why am I telling you this? Is because if you see there's the English word evil, right, which has connotations. In Vedic Sanskrit, there is no exact translation for that word evil. Adharma is not evil. Dharma is wrongly translated as religion. Often. Dharma doesn't mean religion. The root of the word dharma is dhru, that which binds, that which balances. So dharma is that which balances. Adharma is that which unbalances. It's not evil. There's a play between the two. Just like in Vedic Sanskrit, there's no translation for the English word blasphemy. The concept wasn't there, so the word wasn't there. Right? It tells you something about the attitude that our ancestors had. Why am I telling you all this? Because it shows the core approach that our ancestors had, which was an inquisitive, questioning approach. They were willing to question everything. Nothing and no one was beyond question. And they prized balance. When they didn't see the world in binaries, good, evil, the approach was like there's no translation for the English word judgment either. In Vedic Sanskrit, Nyaya is not judgment, where someone says that you are right, you are wrong, you'll go to heaven, you'll go to hell. In the traditional Indian way, even the divine is not supposed to do that. The divine doesn't judge you. No one judges you. You experience the consequences of your own action. Whether you will get moksha or not is a result of your own action. Your karma and its consequences, the law of cause and effect. There's no one judging you. Right? So, again, the approach used to be that don't waste time judging others. Look at others, learn, and apply the lessons in your own life. Because the only thing in your control is your own action. You can't control anything else. Why waste your time judging others? Can you control what someone else's karma is? No, don't bother. Right? That doesn't mean you don't defend yourself. Of course, defend yourself. Right? Don't be someone who just floats through life. But remember that you are only in control and responsible for your own karma. So look at others and learn and apply in your own life. This is the way our ancestors looked at Lord Ram and Raavan as well. This concept of seeing Raavan as a pure, demented villain is a relatively modern approach. Even seeing the Asuras as green-skinned and with horns and all, no, it's not the way they're described in our ancient texts. That's the way they are shown in Amarchita Katha comics. Right? I love Amarchita Katha comics, but they are not a part of our scriptures. Right? So there was the Asuras and Devas were cousins actually, because they're both descendants of Maharishi Kashyap, Saptarishi Kashyap. Right? So they were actually cousins, not cousins. Sorry, I mean half brothers. Right? I mean same father, two different mothers, Aditi and Diti. So there was the ancient approach, and the way Valmiki Ramayana was written, the way most of our ancient versions were written. The good points of Raavan were also shown. Some of the Puranas as well. That was he a knowledgeable man? Yes, he was. Was he very talented? Yes, he was. Was he a very devout Shiv Bhakt? Yes, he was. To this day, Shiv Bhakts chant the Tandav Stotram. Right? I don't know if you've seen the trailer film for my first book, Immortals of Meluha. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Is there on YouTube? There's kick-ass music at the background of that trailer. It was made by Tawfiq Qureshi ji, and he did the chant as well. And the chant is the Tanda Stotram, right? It's in honor of Lord Shiva. And those of us who are Shaivites, because something happens to us when we hear the Tanda Stotram, we get so charged up. Right? It is such a one of the most powerful hymns written in honor of Lord Shiva. It was written by Raavan. Yeah. And to this day, Shaivites chant it. But his bad sides are also shown. The fact that he had no control over his ego. The fact that he had no control over his anger. Which means that there is something you can learn from Raavan as well. That even if you have the awesome talents of Raavan, if you cannot control your ego, if you have anger management issues, it's going to be difficult for you. Right? And Raavan was supremely talented. Right? So there's something to be learned from Raavan as well. If you have a nuanced approach, there's a folk tradition. It's not a part of the written drama, but there's a folk tradition story that when Raavan, it's very popular in the north, when Raavan lay dying on the battlefield, Lord Ram told Lord Lakshman that Raavan may have been an opponent, but he is a Jnani. So go and learn from him. Right? And he told Lord Lakshman that Raavan may have been our opponent, but if you're going to learn from him, you'll treat him with respect. Now, of course, it shows the talent of Raavan, but it shows the qualities of Lord Ram as well, why he's so great. The nobility in him that he's willing to learn something from someone who is his opponent as well. It shows his grace and dignity. It's something we can learn from, right?
Yeah, I think as people dive deeper into kind of reading Valmiki Ramayana versus Amarchita Katha, right? I think it's easy.
Don't get me wrong. I love Amarchita Katha comics.
No, I know.
And they've introduced, a generation of the 70s, 80s, where our education system had cut us off completely from our. So it was good. So don't get me wrong. It's just that, but it's not the. Yeah, it's not the.
Yeah, yeah. So I think my phrasing wasn't correct in that. Even I learned half of kind of when I was growing up through Amarchita Katha. I have a collection at home, kind of. So there's nothing to like. I don't hate them, but I think it's a lot of people just take that as kind of the knowledge versus kind of a concise introduction to what is really out there.
And there's a problem in making things concise. It's like in Twitter, you can't have a nuanced conversation on Twitter. So I never attempt to have a nuanced conversation on Twitter. It's impossible, right? If you want to have a nuanced conversation, you need to write a 500-page book. In a comics, and Anant Pai ji did he deserves the Bharat Ratna. He did a wonderful job. But if you're putting a graphic novel or a comic, just the sheer task of restricting so much, it removes nuance. It's just the way the medium is, right?
Yeah.
So the key thing to realize, our ancestors were not simplistic at all. They didn't see things in simplistic black and white. It's childish to see things in black and white. They understood that when you're speaking to children, you have to, there's a different, like the Jataka tales, or, when you're speaking to children, it is that way, that, simple black and white, good, evil, worship this God, you'll go to heaven, worship this God, you'll go to hell. But that's like the childish thing. At a point of time, you have to grow up and start understanding nuance. Our ancestors understood that. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Approach
so I
things
think,
with nuance. That's all.
yeah. So I think that kind of ties into one of our viewer questions. Is it's kind of a little bit about you, but it's a little bit about kind of our philosophy as well. In that, do you think that all dharmic religions share a common philosophical foundation? And what kind of made you choose to write about the Hindu philosophy rather than any other genre, or like books that have messages with Hindu philosophy rather than any other genre?
No, good question. And essentially, look, what are the dharmic religions? Essentially, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. These are the dharmic faiths. And what unites the dharmic religions is not necessarily faith, right? Now, some of the schools of philosophy in the dharmic religions, faith is important. In some of the schools, it's not important, right? The dharmic paths can be divided into various schools of philosophy. So what is called Hinduism today, can be called into various schools of philosophy. Nyaya, Mimamsa, various schools. And then of course there's the Bodha, Jaina, Charvaks, who are not alive anymore, Ajivikas, Sikh. So these are the schools. Now, some of these schools of philosophy are atheist, right? Like Charvaks, Mimamsas, Bodha, Jaina. These are atheist schools of philosophy. Some of the schools of philosophy have faith, like Sikh, Yoga. They believe in a divine. Right? But so that's the point, that faith or no faith, faith or atheism is not what unites the dharmic religions. There are a common set of philosophies which unite the dharmic ways. Right? One of them is the concept of Atman Brahman. Right? That there is a universal one divine, which is Nirgun Nirakar, which is beyond form, but beyond attributes, beyond gender. So you can't say male, female either. Right? It's in that sense different from the Abrahamic God, which is clearly male.
Yeah.
So this is just a kind of universal spirit, and we have a part of that universal spirit in us. That's what the Atman Brahman concept is, or the belief in reincarnation. All the dharmic religions don't believe in one life and then heaven later. They believe in reincarnation, which is why, again, you'll find across most of the dharmic religion philosophies, we cremate our bodies, right, upon death. We don't bury, because the body is not considered that important. What is important is the soul, and the body has to be, the chemicals in the body have to be returned with respect to Mother Earth so that it can be used for something else. So which is why cremation is done on our bodies when we die. So these are the things which unite us, right? The law of cause and effect.
Yeah.
That what happens to you is a consequences of you put in, right? Of what you put in. So your karma will come back to you in this life or the next. You don't get a free pass just because you believe in something, right? In the dharmic religions, you can't just say, I may have committed terrible crimes, but I believe in this God, therefore I'm safe and I'll go to heaven. No, that does not work in the dharmic religions. You have to do good deeds. You will get the consequences of the karma that you put in. Right? So these are the philosophies that unite the dharmic religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. But of course, there are common philosophies, but there are different approaches that emerge from these common philosophies.
Okay, awesome. So I think with that, we're gonna kind of shift into more of the modern kind of era and kind of our connection, or the youth's connection to these epics and how they're portrayed in the modern era. So one question, at least I had, was that sometimes there's an intentional or unintentional push to make these characters more relevant to modern youth, right? This can be either putting modern clothes on a deity, like having them wear a tux, or like in like a shirt pant, or portraying some gods holding hands, or doing things that most people would consider very modern and not true to ancient literature. Do you think this push from modernization kind of takes away the philosophies that we talked about, or is it like, is this okay? Kind of how do you feel about this kind of issue? Because it's something that, at least here in the Northeast, we've had some kind of issues like this pop up, and throughout the US.
Oh, damn good question. Let me ask it with a counter question.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that India is the only pre-Bronze Age ancient culture that has survived till today? Every other, we like to think, the Dharmic religions, we like to think we are unique.
Mm-hmm.
We are not. There were many others like us in the ancient world, many others who were goddess worshipping, nature worshipping, comfortable with atheism, Murti Puja. There are many others like us. Every single one of them has died out. Every single one of them. Pre-Bronze Age. China is not pre-Bronze Age. It's an ancient culture, but it's not pre-Bronze Age. It's around 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Right? How come we have survived? One obvious thing is, of course, our ancestors were very brave. They kept fighting the last 1,000 years. They didn't surrender to the invaders. That is a fact. I try and speak of that. One of our brave ancestors, King Suheldev, through my latest book.
Yeah.
But that's just one reason. How is it that we have refused to forget our stories? How is it that the ancient Greeks, that modern Greeks do not believe in the stories of Zeus anymore? They don't believe that Zeus actually exists or Apollo actually exists. How come the modern Egyptians don't believe in Amun-Ra anymore? How come modern Iraqis don't believe that Gilgamesh actually existed anymore? And how come, if you ask practically all of us Indians, you ask them, does Lord Shiva exist? Does Lord Vishnu exist? What do you think they'll say? Of course.
Yeah, you'd say yeah.
Or they'll say, of course. Yeah? There's no doubt in our mind. How come we are still alive? How come we continue to hold on so tightly to these stories while others have forgotten it? Why? Why do you think that is?
I think there's an element of adaptation to kind of modern.
Spot
era.
on. Spot on. When a hurricane comes to a land, if the trees are too rigid, they will all fall down. But if there are no trees, if they're just grass, then they'll get trampled over by everyone as well. Then, if you're just grass and everyone's trampling over you, what existence do you have? Your existence means nothing. But say you're a tree which is strong yet flexible, like coconut trees are. Right? When the hurricane comes, they'll bend, let the things go. Moment it stops, they'll come back. Right? So it's an ideal combination of strength and flexibility. That's what our culture has. That we will keep the strength of the old. Chants which go back, or rituals which go back thousands and thousands of years. Right? In the Indus Valley, Indus Saraswati civilization, you find the Shivlingas out there. Right? And we've been carrying on with it for thousands and thousands of years. The Sri Rudram comes from the Vedas, Purushukta comes from the Vedas. At least 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 years old. Till today we chant it. Right? But at the same time, we adapt our stories as well. Lakshman Rekha is not there in the original Valmiki Ramayana.
Yeah.
It's not there. The first time it's mentioned was just 400 years ago in the Ramcharitmanas. But today, most Indians believe Lakshman Rekha is there in the Ramayana. What is that? It's essentially flicks. It's like you've got the soul of the old, and Goswami Tulsidas ji, who wrote the Ramcharitmanas, added in something which was relevant to his age. So we had this wonderful ability to keep the soul of the old and add in something of the new. And we did this again and again and again and again. Right? Therefore, we never lost our attachment to our stories. We never lost our attachment to our ancestors. Because while we kept the connection to the beauty of the old, we always added in something of the modern, which made it relevant once again for a new generation. Right? So what is considered by some as, no, you're doing something different. I say, boss, that is actually our core strength. The fact that we can keep the best of the old and add in something of the new is what has kept us alive for so long. Is what is the reason, one of the key reasons why we are the only pre-Bronze Age civilization that is alive till today. Till today, an ideal mix of strength and flexibility. So I say nothing wrong with it, as long as whatever you add in the modern way is done with respect. Right?
Yeah.
And I'd seen some things of, I remember I'd written on that someone who'd put some marks of our faith or some of the pictures of our gods on doormats. I'm like, boss, that's not okay. Sorry. That completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. That's not okay. But if someone wants to show, our gods and goddesses holding hands, cool, man. But boss, in the Gupta age, our gods and goddesses were sculpted on temples doing far more things than just holding hands.
Yeah.
Right? And that was relevant to the Indians of that era. So they accepted it. Right?
Awesome.
So as long as it's done respectfully, I find nothing wrong with adding something of the modern, which makes it relevant once again.
Cool. So I think one question we've gotten from the audience is very kind of relevant to this upcoming week. This week we have the first brick that is going to be laid at Ram Janmabhoomi Temple. So I think a lot of questions come up with Lord Ram as the ideal character or the ideal man. So for a lot of people, they say, yes, he's the ideal man, but not everybody can be Lord Ram. What would you give? How can you give like one character trait that we can all kind of imbibe within ourselves to make ourselves more like Sri Ram?
You're right. This temple is being reconstructed. I've spoken on it as well. It's a civilizational moment for us, the way I see it. It is because we suffered horrific invasions the last 1,000 years. I must clarify that I've said this very often, that our Indian elite establishment historians, have sadly carried on the British Raj era nomenclature, and which has caused divisions and poison within India. If we don't call the British colonial rule the Christian rule, why do we call the Turkic colonial rule the Islamic rule? So somewhere it is kind of hinted that they were Indian Muslims who carried out these crimes, which is not true. They were foreigners. They were Turks from Central Asia. I've said this often, and I do want to, sidetrack on this because I find it very, very important. That, even the way, popular culture portrays, British colonial rulers will be shown as white-skinned. So we are clear in our mind that they are foreigners. But Alauddin Khilji will be shown as Ranveer Singh. Razia Sultan will be shown as Hema Malini. Or Akbar will be shown as Hrithik Roshan. Again, to cue in your mind that they were Indians. No, they were not. Okay. If you could travel back in time and see those Turkic invaders, to us, they would have looked Chinese. Okay. The Chinese could tell the difference between the Turks and themselves. But to us, they would have looked Chinese. They were from Central Asia. Right? They wouldn't have looked Indian to us. They were foreigners.
Yeah.
And they committed horrific crimes. Truly barbaric, among the worst invaders the world has ever seen. Will Durant, an American historian, had said that the Turkic invasions of India were probably the most brutal in human history. And they destroyed thousands of temples, burned tens of our universities to the ground. killed millions of people, and Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims were both oppressed under that foreign rule. And we have to speak the truth of that. But realize that they were foreigners, they have nothing to do with Indian Muslims or Indian Christians. We must be clear on that. And in that sense, rebuilding this temple, which was demolished on the orders of the Turk, Babur. Babur was a Turk. Right?
Yeah.
They didn't speak Urdu, by the way. Whatever Hindi movies will tell you, they did not speak Urdu. They spoke either Turkic or Persian. You wouldn't have understood anything of what they were saying. It would sound as foreign to you as English would, right, to Indians of that era. Babur, for example, his dynasty, they didn't call themselves Mughal, they called themselves Temuriya, descendants of Temur. So anyway, so the temple reconstruction is a civilizational, no doubt. And it is a time for us to kind of explore Lord Ram and learn from him. And I think two things that we can probably learn from Lord Ram is the sense of equanimity and balance that he had. You know, whether life was going fantastically well or he was suffering dramatically, he was always calm, composed, balanced. There are many strengths we Indians have. Okay, I love our land. I deeply love our culture. But I don't think most people would call us Indians, calm and composed. We are very emotional. We tend to swing on extremes, right?
Yeah.
So it's good that we feel emotions so strongly. But perhaps one of the things we can learn from Lord Ram is a sense of calmness and composure, balance. It's something that our leadership presently shows, right? And you'll find that if you're calm and composed, you're able to handle tough times a lot better. I think that's something that we can learn. Another thing we can learn is respecting laws. Again, I love India. I love our people. No, but the thing of, that you love the strengths, but you'll be honest of our weaknesses as well.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone will accuse us of being very compliant people. Right? So, can we learn from Lord Ram the value of following laws, at least to some extent? Because then our country, our society will become more efficient, more just, easier to manage. Yeah. I think these are things we can learn from Lord Ram.
Awesome. So I think we have another really interesting question from our audience. And it has to do with kind of us Indians outside of Bharat. So I think the question is, are you fearful that many Indians leaving Bharat and immigrating to other countries, that their second generation will not adapt or inculcate the values the same way anymore because they're losing their identity over generations?
Not at all. Look at you guys. Look at, I've engaged with some Indians in the Caribbean. I've traveled to Mauritius, where Indians had gone 150 years ago, right? And at a time when there was no internet, there was no way to remain connected.
Yeah.
Right? And you see how deeply our culture is alive, even out there. In Mauritius, there's a talab out there called the Ganga Talab, right? And they actually believe, the Indian descendants in Mauritius, that if you go and take a dip in Ganga Talab, your sins get washed away. How did this belief emerge? Because when some of them were going 150 years ago, remember, they've been sent as indentured labor, which is frankly slavery in another form.
Yeah.
Some of them actually carried the water of Gangaji all the way to Mauritius. Then they found this talab and they poured that water in. And then they said, now this is also Gangaji. Right? Think of the extents they went to keep their culture alive, to keep our culture alive. Go to the Caribbean islands, engage with Indians out there. It's so lovely to engage with them. And to to the Indian communities across the entire world, do they all follow one path or one way of approaching? No, of course, but that was never our way in any case.
Yeah.
We've never had an approach that all flowers in the world all have to convert into the rose, and you are allowed to be only a rose. If you're not a rose, you will burn in hell. We've never had that approach. Our approach is you can be a rose, you can be a sunflower, you can be a frangipani flower, you can be any flower, right? But there's a string connecting all these flowers together. And that string is what makes up the beautiful garland of our culture. And the only thing is, as long as the flower is aware of that string, of that garland, we are connected. Yeah. I can go to Mauritius. They had a different language, a mix of, they speak English as well, but a mix of some French, some local these things, and they were at Ganga Talab speaking that language, right? And we were doing an arti to Lord Shiva. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but we were both connected. We were both all of us were as deeply moved. That's a string which unites us. No, we will not die, man. We are freaking stubborn people. We have suffered horrific invasions for 1,000 years. We are the only pre-Bronze Age culture which refused to die. Somnath Ji was destroyed 17 times, rebuilt every single time.
Yeah.
We are freaking stubborn people. So we are not going to die that easily. Yeah. But we're all not going to follow one path. We'll follow different interpretations of the path, which is completely cool. That is the Indian way. Awesome. You don't have a concept of blasphemy or, that, no, you can't walk this. No, cool. As long as Ekam Sat Vipra Bhavana Vadanti. Truth is one, but the wise speak it as many. Yeah. We're all allowed our interpretation, as long as we realize that we are connected.
Yeah, so I think that brings us to another question that that we have, right? Because Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti is kind of like it's one of the two staple things that you hear a lot in whenever you discuss Hinduism with fellow Hindus, right? The other term you hear is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And a lot of people have kind of trouble kind of figuring out how to inculcate Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, because as you mentioned, we've been subject to horrific invasions. We've had our temples destroyed. So how do you think that Hindus can kind of get into that mindset of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right?
The thing with all the Dharmic religions, again, I won't just restrict it to Hinduism. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, they all come to the same philosophical approach. It's difficult to reduce it just to, as I said earlier, to one book or one line. You have to understand the context of every line. Yeah. So yes, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is certainly something worth following. Right? Like India did behave during the COVID pandemic, which is still ongoing. When people needed hydroxychloroquine, they were very willing to share it. We didn't behave like some other authoritarian countries which were very happy to export the disease to the rest of the world. Yeah. We behaved with responsibility and tried our best to help others. That's the approach of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But there's also the line of Shate Shatyam Samacharit, that if dusht ke saath dushtata hi karni chahiye. If someone behaves badly with us, we are not the kind who will turn the other cheek. No, we are not. And that's actually what is shown in this book, my latest book, Legend of Suheldev, that we will not strike the first blow. But if someone slaps us, we're not going to turn the other cheek, and we'll not slap in return, we'll actually box in return. Right? Tum jhapad maroge, hum mukka marenge. Right? So we will not land the first blow, but you hit us, we will hit back. Right? And that was the attitude our ancestors had as well, which is why we are alive. If Zoroastrian Persia, for example, one of the greatest civilizations of its time, survived just between 30 to 50 years when the Arabs attacked. That's it. The remnants of their civilization are alive in India today. The Parsis, because they were given refuge in India. Whereas Indians are still alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our culture is still alive 1,000 years later. Part of it is also because Shate Shatyam Samacharit, you hit us, we will hit back.
Yeah.
Often we back project Mahatma Gandhi into our ancient culture. I respect Mahatma Gandhi a great deal, and India has the oldest pacifist traditions in the world, Jainism. Right? It is the oldest pacifist tradition in the world. Right? And there is value to that. You can't have random violence because culture can't survive in an atmosphere of random violence. But if you cannot defend your culture, even then your culture will not survive. Okay? So again, balance, what I was saying. Non-violence is good, but excess non-violence is not good. At times you need violence to defend yourself. Okay? So again, balance. So India, you have to, it can't be just one or two lines. You have to, there's an entire, it's an entire library that we need to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing to understand in India is context. Every line has a context in which it has to be understood. Right?
Yes.
So, ahimsa paramo dharma, but dharma hinsa tathaiv cha.
Yes.
That, yes, non-violence is the greatest dharma, but violence in the defense of dharma is good.
Yeah.
So, if someone attacks us, we will hit back. We're not going to quietly roll over. We will hit back. And we've done it for 1,000 years, which is why we're alive.
Yep. So I think we're going to transition to our last question for this discussion. And it's, again, it's about kind of connecting stories to our modern day. I think you are one of the very few kind of there are a lot of emerging authors who want to bring this our culture back to the youth, but there's a lack of kind of involvement by the either you call it the school system, or maybe kind of lack of talking about these topics out in our friend groups. Whereas you will talk about the epics of Gilgamesh in school. At least we learned that in school. We had to read the Odyssey in school, but we never had to read Raavan, or we never had to read the Mahabharata in its entirety, which is thousands of times or hundreds of times bigger than the Odyssey. So kind of how do you think we can bring that vast kind of, at least that vast introduction to the audience in the outside of Bharat? Because in Bharat, it's just, you can absorb it just by living in Bharat, but you can't really do that here.
No, I think there's a problem in Bharat as well, because our education system, even in India, is designed to cut us off from our culture. It's just that our culture is so widespread that it's impossible for the education system to cut us off. But we teach nothing of our culture in our education system. Whatever the kids learn of our culture is through their parents or through the atmosphere, not through the education system. But yes, we should try and introduce these across, the world as well. If my numbers are, if I remember the data correctly, and the Mahabharata is, I think, 5 times bigger than the Odyssey and the Iliad combined.
Yes.
Is massive, and it's just one of our texts. There are so many.
Mm-hmm.
The Skanda Purana is longer than the Mahabharata. There's so much to be learned. There's so much to be shared. And the journey begins, I think, with all of us, especially those of us who live in democracies. In authoritarian countries, it's not that easy. One of the reasons, one of the benefits of our democracy is we can ask for these things. And if you ask, people listen. And to be fair, I have found, I'm living in London now. It's the first time I'm living outside India. I've traveled a great deal, but I've never lived outside Bharat. It's the first time I'm living outside Bharat, and I find that most native Westerners, as in whites, are very open to discussing India. They don't have a resistance to most people that I've seen. So I'm sure they'll be open, and I find most native Westerners to be pretty open-minded. They're willing to learn, willing to discuss. So if we suggest that, why don't you teach? And they're very open to yoga. And they do realize that yoga is actually not just about the physical exercises, because then you're not getting the true benefits of yoga. You must do pranayam. And in this COVID pandemic, pranayam becomes even more. What is pranayam? A lot of it is actually what pranayam does. It centers the mind, but it also exercises your respiratory system. And COVID is a respiratory disease. If you are strengthening your respiratory system, it's good for you, right, to fight against the COVID disease. So yoga doesn't just exist in isolation. It exists with pranayam and dhyana, meditation. So I'm sure many are willing to learn this. This can be taught in our education system. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, just as introductory texts, I'm sure if we ask, many Westerners will be willing to consider. I also sense, on average, yes, people don't know us, don't know our culture that widely. I agree. And perhaps in some academic circles, there is a bit of a negative attitude towards India. But among most ordinary people, I find that most Westerners tend to have a positive image of India. Because of yoga, because of food. I've heard this term repeatedly. They see Indians as the model minority. Because Indians don't commit that much crime. We are law-abiding. We are focused on education. We do well. We earn well. We pay our taxes. So we are seen as as a positive addition. So I'm sure many of them will be willing to listen. We just have to ask. We live in democracies. So just ask politely, in a civil manner. And over time, people will listen.
Awesome.
You'll be surprised how far we can get with consistent but polite and respectful words.
Yeah.
You have to keep asking it again and again, but very politely, with manners. You'll be surprised how far we can go.
Yeah. So I think with that, we would, if you have any concluding remarks, kind of on epics, on the webinar, on any topics that you feel that you want to speak on, we would love to hear any concluding remarks that you have.
Oh, I'm delighted that you guys have organized this. Wonderful to be engaging with students in the US, and it shows the interests that you guys have in our mother culture. So I'm delighted. I'm delighted to engage. I'm very happy to engage more in the future as well, and read as much as you can. Try and get deeper into our way of life, but equally importantly, be good citizens in the country that you're living in as well. Must of course, be connected to Mother India, be connected to our source culture, but we must also be good residents, good citizens in the country that we are living in. That's what will make us good people. That's what good karma is.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much, Amish ji, for sharing your knowledge on this amazing topic and joining all the way from the UK. We really appreciate your wealth of knowledge. If you're interested in hearing more about Amish ji, please be sure to follow his social media pages and read his many books. He has recently released a book called The Legends of Suheldev, so please do read that, check it out. Also, thank you, Soham, for being our moderator for this webinar as well. We hope all of you viewers enjoyed learning about the epics, the art of storytelling, and our rich Hindu heritage. We would quickly like to present our topic for next week, which is our sacred Bhumi. A Hindu View on Environmentalism. Our speaker is Gopal Patel, who is the founder and director of the Bhumi Project, which is the only Hindu faith-based environmental organization to be recognized by the UN. So join us next week for our 8th and final webinar on Thursday, August 6th at 8:30 p.m. EST to hear his unique take on eco-friendly Hindu practices, sustainability, and practical solutions. Please be sure to follow Northeast Hindu Yuva pages on Instagram and Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch all our previous and future webinars. Thank you all for joining. Dhanyavad and Namaste.